Lonely Cowboy thought his dog was gone, but it returned leading a lost Apache widow. His small ranch sat near low hills and dry plains, a place where the wind spoke more often than people did. Every morning, he woke before the sun, not because he had to, but because sleep never stayed long with him anymore. The house was simple, made of weathered wood, with floors that creaked under slow steps. There were 2 chairs inside, but he always sat in the same one. Years ago, this place had laughter. A woman's soft voice once filled the rooms, and a child's footsteps had run across the porch. Those sounds were gone now, carried away by time and loss. The cowboy never talked about it. He did not visit town much, and when he did, he kept his words short. People there knew him as a quiet man who paid in cash and left quickly. They did not ask questions, and he did not offer answers. The only living soul who truly knew him was his dog. The dog was old, with fur the color of dust and eyes that seemed to understand more than most people ever could. It followed the cowboy everywhere, across the land, into the barn, and back to the house at night. When the cowboy spoke, it was usually to the dog. Simple words. Short sentences. The dog listened, tail low but steady, always near. Each day followed the same pattern. The cowboy fed the animals, fixed broken fences, and checked the water barrels. The sun burned hot and the land showed little mercy, but he worked without complaint. At night he cooked plain food, ate alone, and sometimes sat outside with the dog beside him, watching the stars come out one by one. In those moments, the silence did not feel so heavy. One afternoon, dark clouds rolled in fast, bringing strong winds and thick dust. The sky turned the color of old copper and the air grew hard to breathe. The cowboy stepped outside to secure loose boards and close the barn doors. The dog stayed close, ears flat, eyes alert. Then, in a sudden rush of wind, something startled the animals. A loud noise echoed across the land, sharp and unexpected. The dog ran toward the sound before the cowboy could call it back. The dust grew thicker, and the land disappeared behind a moving wall of sand. The cowboy shouted the dog's name, his voice carried away by the wind. He searched as far as he could see, but the storm swallowed everything. After a while, the storm forced him back inside. The door slammed shut, and the world outside turned quiet again, but the dog did not return. That night, the cowboy did not eat. He sat in his chair, listening for paws on the porch, for a familiar scratch at the door. Nothing came. The house felt larger than ever, filled with empty space and old memories. He told himself the dog was strong, that it had survived worse. Still, sleep did not come. The next morning, the land looked different, as if the storm had erased something important. The cowboy searched again, walking farther than usual, calling out until his throat grew dry. He found tracks that led nowhere and signs that ended too soon. The sun climbed high and hope began to fade. Days passed. Without the dog, the routine felt broken. The cowboy moved slower, spoke less, and stopped sitting outside at night. He kept the dog's bowl filled with water just in case. Sometimes he caught himself listening, expecting a sound that never came. The loneliness he had learned to live with now felt sharper, deeper, like an old wound opened again. He remembered the day he found the dog years ago, thin and tired, hiding near the edge of the land. Back then he had not planned to keep it, but the dog stayed, and somehow so did the cowboy. Together they filled the silence in small but meaningful ways. Now that quiet felt unbearable. On the 5th day, the cowboy stood on the porch at sunset, staring at the open land. The sky burned orange and red, colors too bright for such an empty feeling. He thought about leaving the ranch, about going somewhere else where memories could not follow him. But deep down, he knew he would not go. This land was all he had left. Just as he turned to go inside, he saw movement in the distance. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light or his tired eyes, but then he saw the familiar shape moving slowly toward the ranch. His heart began to beat faster. The dog was coming back. The cowboy stepped forward, hardly breathing, afraid the image would disappear. The dog walked with care, thinner than before but steady. Relief washed over the cowboy like cool water after heat. He called out softly, not wanting to scare it away. Then he noticed something else. Behind the dog, several steps back, walked a woman. She moved slowly, as if each step took great effort. Her clothes were worn and covered with dust, and her dark hair was tied loosely, falling around her tired face. She leaned forward slightly, clearly exhausted. The dog stopped often, looking back at her, waiting, as if guiding her the whole way. The cowboy froze. He had not seen anyone near his land in years. His first feeling was caution, but it quickly gave way to concern. The woman looked lost, worn by the land and the long road behind her. The dog reached the porch and sat down, eyes fixed on the cowboy, as if to say it had done its duty. The cowboy knelt, placing a shaking hand on the dog's head. Only then did he look up at the woman. She stopped a few steps away, her eyes scanning the ranch, then resting on him. There was fear there, but also something else, hope, perhaps, or relief. She spoke softly in a language he did not understand, her voice weak but steady. The cowboy stood slowly, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. He pointed to the house, then to the water barrel. He spoke gently, using simple words, unsure if she understood. She nodded faintly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the quiet ranch that had known only one lonely man and his dog now held something new. Neither the cowboy nor the woman knew what would come next. But in that moment, standing on the edge of the fading light, both understood one thing clearly. None of them were truly alone anymore. The cowboy led them slowly toward the house. He walked a few steps ahead, then stopped to make sure the woman was still following. The dog stayed close to her side, as if afraid she might disappear if it looked away for even a moment. The evening air was cooler now, and the long day seemed to rest heavily on all of them. Inside the house, the cowboy lit a small lamp. The warm light filled the room and softened the hard shadows on the walls. The woman paused at the door, unsure if she should step in. She looked around carefully, taking in every small detail, as if she had learned to be careful everywhere she went. The cowboy nodded gently and stepped aside, giving her space. After a short moment, she entered. The dog walked straight to its old place near the wall and lay down, tired but calm. The cowboy filled a cup with water and handed it to the woman with both hands. She took it slowly, her fingers shaking. She drank carefully, stopping often, as if afraid the water might run out. When she finished, she closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The cowboy pointed to a chair. She hesitated, then sat down, lowering herself as if her legs might fail her. He could see how tired she was now, how the long journey had taken more from her than she wanted to show. He went to the stove and warmed some simple food. The smell filled the room, gentle and comforting. When he placed the bowl in front of her, she looked at him with surprise. Her eyes filled slightly, but she did not speak. She bowed her head once in thanks and began to eat slowly. The cowboy sat across from her, watching quietly, making sure she was all right. He did not ask questions. He had learned long ago that some stories come only when they are ready. Outside, the wind moved softly across the land. The storm from days before felt far away now. Inside, the small house felt different, no longer empty. The cowboy noticed this feeling and did not know what to do with it. He kept his hands folded and his thoughts quiet. After eating, the woman spoke a few words, pointing to herself and saying her name. The cowboy nodded, repeating it carefully so he would remember. Then he pointed to himself and said his own name, a name he had not spoken aloud in days. She listened closely and repeated it back with care. A small smile crossed her face when she said it right. They did not share many words after that. Instead, they used small gestures. The cowboy showed her where she could rest for the night. He laid a clean blanket on the spare bed, one that had not been used in a very long time. She touched the fabric lightly, as if it were something precious. That night, the cowboy did not sleep much. He sat in his chair, listening to the sounds of the house. The dog slept near the bed where the woman rested, standing guard without being asked. Every so often, the cowboy looked toward the closed door, making sure all was well. He felt responsible in a way he had not felt in years. Morning came quietly. The sun rose soft and pale, spreading light across the land. The cowboy prepared simple breakfast and placed it on the table. When the woman came out, she looked more steady than the night before, though the tiredness was still there. She greeted him with a small nod and sat down. The dog wagged its tail slowly, pleased to see them both. As they ate, the cowboy noticed marks on her hands and feet, signs of long travel and hard ground. He brought a small bowl of water and clean cloth, setting them near her. She understood at once and began to clean herself carefully. He looked away, giving her privacy. Later, they stepped outside together. The woman stood still for a moment, looking out at the open land. The wide sky seemed to surprise her. She closed her eyes and lifted her face toward the sun, letting the warmth touch her skin. For the first time, the cowboy saw peace on her face, even if only for a short moment. She pointed toward the distant hills and spoke slowly, using words he did not know, but her voice carried feeling: loss, distance, searching. He listened closely, nodding to show he understood her meaning, even if not her language. He pointed back toward the land behind her, then toward his home, and finally toward her heart. She pressed her hand there gently, her eyes shining. Throughout the day, the cowboy showed her the ranch. He explained things simply, using his hands when words were not enough. She followed him, learning the paths, the fences, the places where water was kept. The dog walked between them, moving happily now, as if proud of bringing them together. At times, the woman stopped and seemed lost in thought. When that happened, the dog sat beside her until she was ready to move again. The cowboy watched this and felt something warm rise inside him. The dog had not just found its way home. It had brought something else with it, something the cowboy did not yet fully understand. As the sun lowered again, the woman gathered her courage and shared more of her story in quiet pieces. She spoke of losing her husband, of traveling alone, of following the dog when it appeared one day like a sign in the dust. The cowboy listened without interruption. He did not turn away when her voice grew soft or when her eyes filled with tears. He stayed still, offering presence instead of words. When she finished, silence settled between them, but it was not an empty silence. It felt full, respectful. The cowboy spoke then, telling her about his life, his losses, and how the land had become both his shelter and his prison. He kept his words simple, but the weight of them was clear. The woman listened closely. When he stopped, she placed her hand over her heart again, then gently toward him. It was a small gesture, but it carried deep meaning. That night, they shared a quiet meal under the stars. The dog lay between them, calm and content. The cowboy looked up at the sky and realized something had changed. The loneliness that once felt endless now had a crack in it, letting light through. Neither of them knew how long the woman would stay or what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in many years, the cowboy did not fear the next day. The land was still wide and quiet, but it no longer felt empty. The days that followed passed slowly, like soft footsteps across the land. The woman stayed at the ranch, resting and gaining strength. The cowboy did not ask her to leave, and she did not ask to stay. They moved forward one day at a time, letting quiet understanding guide them. The dog remained close to her, always watching, always ready. Each morning, the cowboy rose early as usual. He made breakfast for 3 now, placing the extra bowl on the table without thinking too much about it. At first, the woman ate little, but slowly her appetite returned. She began to help in small ways, sweeping the floor, carrying water, or sitting outside while the cowboy worked, keeping him company in silence. Words between them were still few, but meaning filled the spaces between. They learned to understand each other through small actions. When the cowboy handed her tools, she knew what he needed. When she grew quiet, he knew to give her space. The dog seemed to guide them both, moving easily between them, reminding them that trust did not always need language. One afternoon, while fixing a broken fence, the cowboy noticed riders far in the distance. His body tensed at once. Visitors were rare, and he did not welcome them. He watched carefully until the riders disappeared beyond the hills. Still, unease stayed with him. He knew the land remembered old wounds, and not everyone looked kindly on strangers. That evening, he warned the woman using simple gestures and careful words. He pointed toward the hills, then toward the house, then placed his hand firmly on the table. She understood the concern in his eyes. Her face grew serious, and she nodded slowly. She gathered her small belongings closer that night, as if preparing herself for something she had faced before. As days passed, the cowboy noticed how the woman often looked toward the horizon, especially at sunset. Her eyes carried longing, mixed with worry. One evening, she finally spoke more than before. Her words were slow, broken, but clear enough for him to understand the heart of her message. She was searching for her people. She believed they might be somewhere beyond the hills, moving with the seasons. The cowboy listened carefully. He did not interrupt or rush her. When she finished, he nodded and stared out at the land for a long time. Helping her would not be easy. It could bring trouble, but doing nothing felt wrong. He remembered his own losses, the feeling of being left behind in a world that kept moving. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The dog slept near the door, alert as always. The woman rested in the next room, her breathing steady. The cowboy realized that the quiet he once protected so fiercely was no longer what he wanted. Loneliness had kept him safe, but it had also kept him empty. The next morning he made a decision. He brought out an old map, spreading it across the table. The woman leaned in, studying it closely. She pointed to marks and places, naming them softly. Her finger traced a path that led far from the ranch. The cowboy followed the movement carefully. He nodded once, then twice. He would help her find her way. Preparation took time. The cowboy gathered supplies, checked the horses, and packed food and water. The woman watched closely, helping where she could. The dog stayed nearby, tail wagging gently, sensing movement and purpose. For the first time since arriving, the woman smiled openly. Their journey began before sunrise. The land was cool and quiet, painted in soft colors. They moved carefully, staying alert. The cowboy rode ahead, guiding the way. The woman followed, strong despite the long road behind her. The dog ran between them, tireless and proud. Along the way, they shared small stories. The woman spoke of her husband, of laughter and songs, of evenings filled with warmth. Her voice softened when she spoke his name. The cowboy listened, offering quiet respect. In return, he shared memories of his family, of a time when his home was full. Some moments were painful, but sharing them made the weight lighter. As they traveled, they encountered signs of others, old tracks, burned-out fires, abandoned camps. The woman studied these carefully, hope rising and falling with each clue. The cowboy stayed patient, reminding her with calm gestures that the road was long, but they were not alone. One afternoon, they reached a high ridge. From there, the land stretched wide in every direction. The woman stood still, scanning the distance. Suddenly, she pointed toward a faint trail far below. Her breath caught and tears filled her eyes. She whispered words of relief and disbelief. The cowboy followed her gaze and nodded. They moved faster now, hearts beating with purpose. As they descended, voices carried on the wind, soft, distant, but real. The woman pressed her hand to her chest, tears falling freely now. She had found them. They stopped at a safe distance. The cowboy did not go farther. He understood this was her moment. The woman turned to him, eyes shining with gratitude. She spoke words he could not understand, but her meaning was clear. She reached out and held his hand for a long moment, then knelt to embrace the dog, whispering thanks. The dog wagged its tail, licking her face gently. The cowboy smiled, a rare, quiet smile that came from deep within. The woman rose and took a few steps forward, then stopped and looked back one last time. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly, a sign of respect and farewell. She nodded, then turned and walked toward her people, disappearing into the moving figures below. The cowboy stood there for a long time, watching until she was gone. The land felt different now, not empty but full of echoes and meaning. He turned his horse and began the ride home, the dog running beside him. As the ranch came back into view, the cowboy felt something he had not felt in years: peace. He knew his life would not return to what it once was. Something had changed forever. And as he stepped off his horse and looked at the quiet house, he understood that helping someone else find their way had helped him find his own. The ranch felt different after the cowboy returned alone. The house stood quiet again, but it was not the same kind of silence as before. It was softer, filled with memories that did not hurt as much. The dog walked around the yard, stopping now and then as if expecting the woman to appear from behind the barn or along the fence. The cowboy noticed this and felt a gentle ache in his chest. He returned to his daily work, but his steps were slower. While fixing fences or feeding the animals, his thoughts often drifted back to the journey. He wondered if the woman had reached her people safely and if she was warm and cared for. He hoped she felt peace. Sometimes at night, he sat outside and spoke quietly to the dog, sharing these thoughts with the only listener he trusted. A few days later, strangers came. The cowboy noticed dust rising on the far edge of his land. Riders were approaching, moving with purpose. He stood still, watching carefully. When they came closer, he saw they were settlers from a nearby area. He knew some of them by sight, though not by name. They rarely spoke, but their eyes often held questions and suspicion. The riders stopped near the fence. One man called out, asking if the cowboy had seen a woman traveling alone. His voice was calm, but there was tension beneath it. The cowboy took a slow breath. He felt the dog press against his leg, steady and alert. He answered carefully, choosing his words with care. He said he had seen no one recently, only the land and the sky. The man studied his face, searching for signs of a lie. The cowboy met his gaze without fear, his voice steady. After a long moment, the riders turned away and left, their dust fading into the distance. The cowboy exhaled slowly. His hands shook just a little. He knew he had crossed a line, even without raising his voice or lifting a hand. But deep inside, he felt certain he had done the right thing. Protecting someone who had already lost so much mattered more than staying unnoticed. Word spread faster than he expected. In town, people began to look at him differently. Conversations stopped when he entered a store. Some faces showed confusion, others quiet judgment. No one confronted him directly, but he felt the change. He kept his head down and returned home quickly each time. The ranch, once a place of chosen isolation, now felt like a shield. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. The cowboy's heart skipped. As the shape grew closer, he saw it was not the woman but an older man from her people. The man approached slowly, hands visible, his posture calm and respectful. The cowboy stepped forward, cautious but open. The man spoke in careful English, his words measured. He thanked the cowboy for helping the woman, for guiding her safely home. He explained that she had spoken highly of him and the dog, calling them gifts sent at the right time. The cowboy listened quietly, his chest tight with emotion. He nodded, unable to speak at first. The man reached into his bag and placed a small object into the cowboy's hand. It was simple, made by hand, filled with meaning. A sign of gratitude, not payment. After the man left, the cowboy stood alone, turning the object over in his palm. The dog sat beside him, tail resting on the ground. For the first time, the cowboy felt seen, not judged or misunderstood, but truly understood. Still, change brings unrest. More settlers began passing by the ranch, some slowing their pace, others watching from afar. The cowboy sensed tension in the air. Old fears and old stories lived deep in the land, and not everyone was ready to let them rest. He stayed alert, keeping his routine steady, refusing to be driven away by quiet pressure. One night, the wind rose strong again. Clouds covered the stars, and the land felt restless. The cowboy sat near the fire, the dog at his feet. He thought about the life he had lived so far, shaped by loss, silence, and survival. Helping the woman had stirred something inside him, something he could no longer ignore. He realized that isolation had been his way of hiding from pain, but connection, even brief, had given him strength. He no longer wanted to disappear into the quiet. He wanted to live with purpose, even if that brought risk. The next morning he rode into town, something he rarely did without reason. He spoke to the store owner, then to a few others. His words were simple and calm. He said the land belonged to everyone who respected it, and kindness cost nothing. Some listened, some did not. But he spoke anyway. When he returned home, he felt lighter. The dog ran ahead, happy and free. The ranch welcomed them back with open space and familiar sounds. That evening, the cowboy stood on the porch and watched the sunset. The colors spread across the sky, rich and deep. He understood now that life had given him a second chance, not to erase the past, but to grow beyond it. He had chosen courage over comfort, truth over silence. Whatever came next, he would face it standing, not hiding. As darkness settled, the cowboy went inside, closing the door gently behind him. The house felt warm, filled with quiet strength. The dog curled up nearby, peaceful and content. Outside, the land rested under the stars, holding stories old and new. And within that wide, open space, a lonely cowboy had found his place again, not alone but connected, guided by choices made with heart and honor. Time moved forward, slow and steady, like the seasons across the land. The cowboy settled back into his routine, but his days no longer felt empty. Each morning he woke with purpose. He cared for the ranch, fixed what was broken, and planned for the future in small, thoughtful ways. The dog stayed close, its presence a quiet reminder of how much one choice could change a life. The small object the older man had given him rested on a shelf near the window. The cowboy did not touch it often, but he saw it every day. It reminded him that kindness could travel far, even across wide and silent land. When the sun hit it just right, it caught the light and seemed to glow softly, like a promise kept. Life on the ranch slowly opened again. Neighbors began to pass by without stopping, then with a nod and finally with a few words. The tension that once hung in the air began to fade. The cowboy did not push for acceptance. He simply lived honestly, letting time do its work. People noticed. They always did. One afternoon, a family from town stopped to ask for water. The cowboy welcomed them without hesitation. He watched as the dog greeted their children, calm and gentle. Laughter filled the yard for a short while, light and warm. When they left, the cowboy stood quietly, surprised by how natural it had felt to share space again. As weeks passed, he began riding farther from the ranch, exploring land he had avoided for years. He found beauty in places he had once ignored, hills that glowed at sunrise, valleys where the wind sang low and steady. With every ride, the weight he had carried for so long grew lighter. Sometimes, as evening fell, he thought of the woman. He imagined her among her people, safe and supported, her grief slowly easing. He hoped she smiled more now. He hoped she remembered the ranch not as a place of struggle, but as a place where help arrived when she needed it most. One day, long after the dust of the past had settled, a familiar figure appeared again on the horizon. This time the cowboy recognized her walk before he saw her face. His heart beat faster, but he stayed still, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. She came closer, riding calmly, strong and confident. She was not alone. Others followed at a respectful distance, stopping far from the ranch. She dismounted and walked toward him, her expression open and warm. The dog barked once, then ran to her, tail wagging with joy. The cowboy smiled, a deep and honest smile that reached his eyes. She spoke in clearer English now, her voice steady. She thanked him again, not just for saving her, but for reminding her of trust. She said her people were doing well. She had found her place again, but she had come back to see the man who helped her when she had nothing. They sat outside as the sun lowered, talking slowly, sharing stories of the months that had passed. There was no rush, no pressure, just understanding. She told him that kindness lived longer than fear and that his choice had changed more than one life. Before leaving, she gave him a small bundle of dried herbs and a woven band made by hand. The cowboy accepted them with respect, placing them carefully in his pocket. They stood in silence for a moment, then nodded to each other, a farewell without sadness. When she rode away, the cowboy felt no ache, only peace. The ranch returned to its quiet ways, but it was no longer lonely. The cowboy began helping others when they passed through, a place to rest, a meal, simple guidance. He became known not as a man who avoided the world, but as one who respected it. Years later, when his hair had turned white and his steps slowed, he still sat on the porch at sunset. The dog, older now, rested beside him. Together, they watched the sky change colors just as they always had. But the silence felt full, rich with memory and meaning. The cowboy understood then what life had been teaching him all along. That loss could shape a person, but it did not have to define them. That love could return in unexpected ways. That one small act, guided by heart, could open doors long thought closed. As night settled over the land, stars filling the sky, the cowboy closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He was no longer a lonely man holding on to the past. He was a part of something larger, connected to the land, to people, to stories that would live on. And in that wide, open world, with his loyal dog at his side, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.